Oberst Marcus Wolf, who, by the way, was very careful to dress as General Oberst. You know what it's like when you're dressing a German general. They do like to be addressed properly. So, you must be correct. MI6 didn't understand this. I mean, they keep lecturing me about, Michael, you know, you've got to be nice to the Germans, and they go and have this interrogation with Marcus Wolf, and they're jumping all over him, and of course I address him as Herr General Oberst. And he liked that. Well, there's no point, if you're interrogating somebody, no point upsetting them. MI6 wanted to arrest him, absolute farce. The interrogation of Marcus Wolf on Ebert Heath lasted 15 seconds. I just turned around, put my arm around him and said, well done, Marcus, on Ebert Heath. It took us 60 years to spot him. She said, Danke. He had nowhere to go. Interrogation over. We just carried on having a drink and chatting about his new wife, and who was also present, and other matters. It was all very pleasant. You don't need to get the thumb screws out. I'm a barrister. I'm not allowed to do that anyway. There are rules about barristers torturing people. Buy him a drink. Ask somebody nicely. In that case, I knew Ebert Heath as a German spy, but some people in MI6 were querying my analysis. So this whole meeting had been set up, and there was one bloke from 6 who was in on the loop and just smiled, and another bloke who wasn't, who didn't realise Ebert Heath was a German spy, nearly fell out of his chair, much to Marcus's amusement. I generally find that there's absolutely no point getting upset in intelligence. There is very little point personalising things. Marcus Wolf was responsible for the deaths of a number of MI6 agents, but there's absolutely no point, if you're trying to get intelligence out of him, letting that affect your judgment. You have to be objective, you have to be cool, and if you're going to allow emotions to run away with you, by and large, you know, if you let your heart take over, the head gets left behind, and you know, you're going to be outmanoeuvred. Outmanoeuvring Marcus Wolf was one of the achievements I'm most proud of in intelligence. You had to get up very early that morning. You know, if you're dealing with somebody with Marcus Wolf's level of intelligence, you don't go in with this, oh, you've been responsible for killing, what about Bill, and what about Bert, and I lost Henry 30 years ago on the Berlin Wall thanks to you. Well, that's just nonsense. That's not going to get you anywhere at all. The Germans also pursued a hot war strategy. This would normally involve surprise attacks, for example, the Korean War. We now know that the Germans controlled North Korea. They still do. DVD controls North Korea. The chap in Pyongyang is just a puppet, reports to the Germans. And the Germans, all the strategy for North Korea in 50 was done by German military officers. German intelligence largely controlled North Korean intelligence. They set it up. And Major General Adolf Galland, there was a former naval officer here, a retired naval officer who was well aware of the German involvement in the Korean War, because on his aircraft carrier, HMS Ocean, back in the Korean War, they were able to monitor the MiG radio frequencies, and they were using expressions like Achtung Saber, which is a dead giveaway. Your average Russian pilot or your average Chinese pilot does not go around saying Achtung Saber when he's about to be jumped by a bunch of F-86s. I was actually told that story for the first time by someone present this afternoon, and it clicked with the other bits of intelligence I had. Intelligence gathering is often a long, slow process, and sometimes you don't see the jigsaw. You get a piece here and a piece there, but that just fitted in very nicely with a piece of intelligence I'd got from a colonel who'd flown B-52s over Hanoi, who said, Michael, I flew B-17s over Berlin, and I flew B-52s over Hanoi, and I can tell you the people organising the air defences of both the cities were the same. So look, the tactics were identical. Everything about it just was so very familiar to me. And one of the reasons I survived Nam is because I knew what the bad guys were doing, because I'd been there before. And that was true. It was Major General Adolf Galland had organised the MiG-15 boys in Korea, and he had organised the air defences of Hanoi. And if you look at his CV, you'll see a gap during the Vietnam War and a gap during the Korean War. A man who became later Inspector General Luftwaffe, an Me-262 pilot in World War II, who flew MiG-15s in Korea, died only last month. And if you look at his obituaries, published obituaries, the gap in the CV for the Korean War is farcical. I think they had him down as basket weaving, or lace making, or gardening, or something. You know, nothing to do with what he was actually doing, which is out there in Korea shooting down British and American pilots. Now, the Vietnam War, identical. The Ho Chi Minh was a German spy. China, the same. Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai were both German spies, recruited at a very early age. Mao Zedong was into little girls, very easy to recruit, and the Germans have largely controlled communist China since then. The Cold War strategy, the German strategy in the Cold War was to try and get the British and Americans to fight each other. So the hawks on both sides very often ended up reporting to Germany. You'd have a hawk who was coordinating with, you'd have a Russian hawk coordinating with an American hawk, and these hawks were talking to each other. McNamara, another German spy. The Germans were organizing the Vietnam War from the North Vietnamese side, but they also had their spies in Washington. One of the reasons why I'm welcome in the Pentagon, because we are doing analysis of what happened in the Vietnam War. The Americans need to understand, because they're fighting another similar war, and we see similar tactics being used by the Germans over Afghanistan. German assets in London and Washington proposing completely pointless strategies because the Germans are backing the Taliban. The EU, another German strategy. John Foster Dulles was very critical. The real key people on the EU were John Dulles, German spy, Jean Monnet, German spy, and Albert Speer. And it was largely these three, I think, who cooked up the idea of the EU. The notion is you undermine sovereignty, you create a super, if you can't undermine a state completely, and you have a supranational authority, and if you control the supranational authority, then you control all the member states. That's what the EU is all about. The EU is, of course, a complete nonsense. The sooner we leave, the better. The current cost of the EU is about £185 billion a year. The public and the political class are slowly becoming aware of the total costs, and I very much hope that after the next general election we'll have a sensible government which will pull us out of the EU. Moving forward rapidly, as I'm running out of time, I see the chairman is starting to stir. Where do we go from here? Well, what we have is a murderous German intelligence agency called the DVD, which at the moment is into drug running, kiddie smuggling, like Madeleine McCann, organising wars, controls the Taliban, controls Al-Qaeda. One of the reasons we know it controls Al-Qaeda is the Americans put a satellite. The Americans love satellites, and God love them, so do I. I mean, satellites are wonderful collecting intelligence. The Americans aren't so hot at human intelligence, although they are getting, I have to tell you, they're not that bad. On my last trip to the States, they can set up meetings very beautifully. I just pulled in off, I was on I-70 driving east, and I drove 3,700 miles, and I just pulled in to a McDonald's. I'd announced that I was going to be at this particular McDonald's, get my burger and fries, be ready to fuel myself up for the next 300 miles, and find myself sitting next to a member of the cryptologic community. We have a discussion. The chances of me sitting next to a member of the cryptologic community having discussions about Al-Qaeda at a McDonald's in Colorado are not that high, frankly. That was all obviously set up very, very beautifully. So the Americans do HUMINT actually surprisingly well at times. Don't underestimate them. But they are very, very good at satellites. The Americans only finally understood and only finally bought my analysis on Germany controls Al-Qaeda when they put a satellite over the office in Germany. They said, Michael, give us the coordinates of the office. Here are the coordinates, boys. Where is it? There it is. Bird overhead, Al-Qaeda walking in and out. They just caught them on camera. By the time the Germans realized what was happening, it was too late. Very difficult to explain why senior Al-Qaeda figures would be walking in and out of an office in Munich. Now, what's Al-Qaeda? What business has Al-Qaeda got in Munich? They weren't there for the beer festival. Officially, they didn't drink. Eyebrows were raised when I got somebody to have lunch with Osama bin Laden. The Americans looking for Osama bin Laden, so we had somebody around for lunch. We're British, that's how we work, Harry. If we want to find out what somebody's up to, we just go around and have lunch. The Americans are looking for him with special forces in Waziristan, hundreds of miles from where he was. We found out where he was in a Pakistani safe house. We found out where he was, and we just slipped in somebody to have lunch. So I popped over to the Pentagon and said, right, we were having a chat with bin Laden the other day. What do you mean you're having a chat with bin Laden the other day? Well, I wasn't. I'm not allowed to have chats with bin Laden. But we slipped somebody in from the old days in the anti-Soviet campaign in the 1980s who knew bin Laden well, and he just popped round for lunch, and this is what bin Laden's up to. He, by the way, is dead, taken out in July as a result of an internal DVD decision to eliminate him. He turns up to rendezvous in Waziristan and is now an ex-terrorist. He has fallen off his perch, and a wonderful thing that is too, for everybody, apart from him. Now, there are two ways out of the current mess. We're already fighting a war with Germany. It's just an undeclared war. We're losing casualties. We're losing 30,000 casualties a year to the drugs war, largely controlled from Germany. The Americans are losing 300,000. We're in a war whether we like it or not. There are two ways out. One is a hot war. One is a deal. But a deal, or a German closure of their intelligence, a dismantling of Al-Qaeda, dismantling of all the paedophile networks, handing us over lists of their agents,